The age of the Crusades greatly impacted the Spanish Reconquista. Throughout the High Middle Ages, popes would call crusades against the Moors in the Iberian Peninsula. Some students of history wrongfully assumed that prior to the Crusades, the Reconquista was driven simply by hunger for land and wealth. But this is an erroneous belief. Although the struggle for power and territory was always present in the conflicts of medieval Spain, for the Moors, Islam was the proper ordering force of the world and should rightly rule, while for the Christians, the Moors were an alien and infidel people occupying territory that should be reconquered for the true faith. As historian Joseph O'Callaghan puts it, the Reconquista was, at this time, a religious war, not a crusade. And yet, it was on the Iberian Peninsula that early concepts of crusading were developing and coming into practice. During the reign of King Alfonso VI of León-Castile, Christian Spain increasingly received influences from beyond the Pyrenees. French monks brought the Cluniac observances, while French knights arrived to join in the wars against the Moors. The papacy, in the throes of the Gregorian reform, was exerting its influence more strongly. Those two great reform popes, Alexander II, 1061 to 1073, and Gregory VII, 1073 to 1085, both took active interest in the Reconquista, making it a priority to bolster Spanish efforts against the Moors. Alexander II helped organize the campaign known to history as the Crusade of Barbastro, launched in 1064, some 3 decades before the First Crusade. It was this expedition, and not the First Crusade, which included what was arguably the first papally sanctioned crusade indulgence. In the words of Pope Alexander, "Those knights destined to set out for Spain, we, by the authority of the holy apostles Peter and Paul, relieve them of penance and grant them remission of sins." This sounds quite similar to the indulgence that popes would attach to crusades throughout the 12th and 13th centuries. Historians still debate the matter, but Barbastro may have been the true First Crusade, though it was ultimately just one episode in an ongoing evolution of religious and military concepts that shaped the Crusades movement in the coming centuries. Once he'd overcome his brothers, Alfonso VI of León-Castile, called by Pope Gregory VII the glorious King of Spain, inherited the entire domain of his father, Fernando I. Like his father, Alfonso profited from tribute paid by the Muslim taifa states of Seville, Granada, Badajoz, Toledo, and Zaragoza. But Alfonso's father had greatly expanded the power of León-Castilla, positioning it to annex the 50,000 square kilometer trans-Duero. Alfonso's ambition was ultimately to further the Reconquest. Toledo, once the royal city of the Visigothic kings, was a long-cherished desire of the Christian North. Alfonso's determination to bring Toledo directly under his own power is revealed in a letter he wrote to Pope Gregory VII, describing his plans to install an archbishop in that city. Until 1075, the taifa of Toledo was ruled by Al-Mamun, a patron of poets and scholars, and an ally to Alfonso VI. Al-Mamun expanded his domain to include Valencia and Córdoba, but after his death, Al-Mamun's grandson, Al-Qadir, lost Valencia to rebellion, while Al-Mutamid, emir of Seville, seized Córdoba. In 1078, a coup in Toledo itself sent Al-Qadir fleeing to the court of Alfonso, where he begged the Christian monarch to restore him to power. Alfonso seized the moment. Marching his troops south, he took direct control of Toledo's surrounding fortresses. On the throne of Toledo, he placed Al-Qadir, who in turn paid a massive tribute to León-Castilla. By the summer of 1083, Alfonso led a campaign deep into the taifa of Seville as punishment for the emir Al-Mutamid's failure to pay annual tribute. Alfonso, in overawing force, marched his army deep into Al-Andalus, ravaging the countryside. At Tarifa, the Christian monarch reached the southern tip of the peninsula, where he rode his stallion out into the surf, shouting, "This is the very end of Spain, and I have set foot upon it." All this symbolized Alfonso's mastery of Iberia and served to intimidate the other taifas from interfering with his planned conquest of Toledo. By now, Al-Qadir's rule in Toledo grew untenable. Many Toledans viewed him as a weak puppet of the hated Christians, and some factions began actively plotting his overthrow. Once again, Al-Qadir turned to Alfonso, this time begging him to outright besiege Toledo so that he could surrender to him honorably. In the summer of 1084, Alfonso obliged, beginning a formal siege of the city. Alfonso granted Al-Qadir the courtesy of time to request aid from the other Muslim taifas, which came, as expected, to nothing. On May 6, 1085, Toledo surrendered. This marked a monumental advance in the Christian Reconquista, for not since the initial Arab conquest had a Christian king reigned in Toledo. Now Alfonso rode through the city in triumph. Alfonso granted generous terms to the Muslims who chose to remain, the right to worship freely, maintain their possessions, and even their chief mosque. The king granted equally generous terms to the local Jews. Despite all this, there could be little doubt that ultimately the Christians would have the great mosque, which had been a church in the Visigothic age. On the king's departure, the Archbishop Bernard seized the Grand Mosque and converted it into a cathedral. Alfonso never undid the archbishop's work, and the mosque continued as Toledo's chief cathedral. Some commentators make much of Alfonso's fair treatment of Toledo's Muslims, but the truth is that Spain's future crusading kings, such as Alfonso the Battler or James the Conqueror, would also grant mostly generous terms to conquered Moors. Although he reigned before crusading ideology had been formalized, Alfonso VI saw himself in a manner quite similar to his crusading descendants, a champion for the Christian faith, though nevertheless more than willing to accommodate a submissive tax-paying Muslim community. Alfonso VI was able to occupy not only Toledo, but a broad region in the Tagus Valley, from Talavera in the west to Guadalajara in the east. Al-Qadir was rewarded for his loyalty. Alfonso installed him as ruler of Valencia. Meanwhile, the remaining taifa rulers were alarmed. They'd grown comfortable with the stable, if humiliating, system of tributary payments to the Christians. Toledo's fall was a foreshadowing of the ultimate fate of all Moorish lands as the Leonese king grew in power. Al-Mu'tamid of Seville sent an embassy to the Almoravids of North Africa, requesting their aid. The Christianization of Toledo would indeed provoke action from the Almoravids. The capture of Toledo would be the primary Iberian military aim of the Almoravids for decades to come.